Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'll be continuing to read Black Panther the Young Prince. So let's continue. Chapter 23. The school day was over and T'Challa and Zeke were just finishing up a chess match. Truth be told, T'Challa hadn't been able to concentrate at all. He'd made his moves without carefully thinking, something Zeke had caught onto and taken advantage of. There was something he had to do. There was no way around it. T'Challa drummed his fingers on the table and let out a sigh. Zeke? Yeah? Do you know where Gemini Jones lives? Zeke tilted his head. Why do you want to know that? Marcus said he was staying with him, remember? Zeke paused a moment before speaking. So, let me get this straight. Marcus not only joined the Skulls, now he's living with their leader. Why would he? I don't know, T'Challa interrupted. Like I said before, he's had problems with his host family, since we've been here. Zeke nodded slowly, like he wasn't sure he should believe T'Challa's explanation. Hey, he said, fiddling with a pawn on the board and not meeting T'Challa's gaze. You never said where you live. When I asked you last night, where do you stay anyway? T'Challa stiffened. His brain ran in circles. Think. One of my uncles has a place on Michigan Avenue, he blurted out. Another lie, he thought with regret. He was amazed at how quickly he could deceive people. Ah, Zeke said, and then, after a brief pause, wait a minute, the other day you said the host family we've been staying with, you and Marcus. So which is it? Are you staying with your uncle or a host? Zeke, T'Challa bristled, where does Gemini live? Zeke shrank in his seat. T'Challa immediately regretted his outburst. I'm sorry, he said. I'm just wondering about my friend. Zeke let out a breath. I know, he said contritely, pushing up his glasses. I would be too if my friend went around kissing a dead man's skull. T'Challa swallowed. He lives over by the big Greek church on Wentworth and 29th Street. You can't miss it. It's got a sculpture in the front yard. It's kind of like a big animal thing. T'Challa nodded and made a mental note. Okay, he said. Thanks. I'll see you soon, Zeke. And sorry. No problem, Zeke answered. T'Challa turned to leave. Hey, T, Zeke called. T'Challa turned around. Be careful. T'Challa smiled. I will, he said. I know how to take care of myself. But the half smile he returned was a troubled one. T'Challa walked with his hands stuffed in his pockets and braced himself against the wind that came swirling off the lakefront. He really shouldn't have blown up at Zeke, he realized. He was just asking questions, something any friend would have done. I have to start being more careful, patient. That's what my father would say. Nothing was ever accomplished through anger. T'Challa promised himself he would take his father's wisest advice. He had to try talking to M'Baku once more, make him come to his senses. They'd been friends since childhood, and T'Challa wasn't going to give up on him that easily. He thought of taking a bus, but wasn't sure how often they ran. He passed basketball courts and check-cashing shops, liquor stores, and churches as he turned onto Wentworth. A group of boys in big coats came sauntering in his direction. Zeke had told him to be careful, but T'Challa wasn't afraid. He was a prince, after all, and he could certainly handle himself. The sidewalk was only so big, and the boys didn't look like they were going to move, so T'Challa stepped aside, but not before one of them bumped into his shoulder. Watch where you're going, man, one of them said. T'Challa paused but did not speak. The boy drew a little closer. He had at least 3 inches of height on T'Challa. You owe me an apology, the boy said. The other boys grouped in a circle around T'Challa, as if he were an antelope being sized up by lions, something he had seen more than once. You heard the man, one of them said. Apologize, son. T'Challa looked from left to right, keeping an eye on their movements. I'm not your son, he said. I'm the son of T'Chaka, he wanted to say, the Black Panther king of Wakanda. The boy cocked his head. What's wrong, dude? You can't hear? He brushed imaginary debris from his shoulder. You bumped into me. Got dirt on my coat. Apologize. Someone grabbed T'Challa's throat from behind. T'Challa drove his right elbow back into his attacker's stomach, then spun around quickly and struck the boy in the chest with the heel of his left palm. The boy doubled over and flew back. Another kid lunged. T'Challa caught his arm and struck down hard at his elbow. Snap! The remaining boy bounced on his toes and held up both fists, but dropped them after a fiery glare from T'Challa. It's cool, man, the boy said, raising his hands in defeat and slowly stepping back. No worries, bro. And then he took off running, leaving both of his friends on the ground, rolling around in pain. T'Challa looked at his attackers for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said, but I'm really not your son. He shook his head and turned. Then he made his way quickly down the street. T'Challa had looked back and saw the two boys picking themselves up from the ground. They seemed to be arguing with each other, raising their arms and shouting. He squared his shoulders and continued on, glancing behind him every now and then just to make sure they weren't regrouping for another attack. I didn't want to hurt them, he thought, his heart still racing, but I have to protect myself. That's what Father always said. After another minute or two, T'Challa passed a massive church with stained windows and onion-shaped domes on the very top. Rows of houses were on the opposite side of the street. One was set apart from the others, on its own lot. There was no mistaking it. The whole house was surrounded by a high fence, except for a gate at the entrance, set far from the walkway. A metal sculpture that seemed to be made from rusted car parts sat in the front yard. It reminded T'Challa of a griffin, a mythological creature with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle. Sharp metallic talons gripped the block of wood it perched upon. Strange, he thought. He unlatched the gate and walked down a flagstone path, which led to a row of little white steps. There he rang the buzzer. He heard footsteps and the door opened with a creak. The man who stood behind it was taller than Gemini, but just as intimidating. He wore a black suit and a white shirt with a red tie knotted at his throat. Piercing dark eyes looked out from a thin face with a prominent sharp nose leading to a finely trimmed beard. He smelled of clove, a scent T'Challa recognized from some of the healers in Wakanda. You are here for Marcus, the man said. His voice was slow and deep. It wasn't a question. I am, he said. The man breathed in and seemed to grow even taller. I am Gemini's father, and you are T. He said this with curiosity, like T'Challa was some kind of strange bird or animal, a specimen for this man's collection. How does he know who I am? Yes, T'Challa said. I am. Do come in then, Mr. Jones said. T'Challa followed Mr. Jones inside and watched him slowly walk to the foot of the stairs. Marcus, he called out. T'Challa took in the room around him, trying his best not to be obvious. It was like he had just stepped into a museum, but one from a place he didn't know. There were skulls of several animals that he did not recognize, African sculptures carved from wood and ivory, some with elongated necks from exaggerated features. Several clay bowls filled with flowers and red and blue powders rested on end tables. But what really took his breath away were the masks. They were everywhere, on the walls, set upon pedestals, and columns, hanging from the ceiling on wires. All of them were quite strange, with leering grins and broken teeth. A stand in candelabrum displayed 3 red candles, flickering with flame in the dim room. It smelled of dust and old books. Even though he had never been to an American home before, he knew that most probably didn't look like this. Heavy footsteps brought him back to attention. M'Baku bounded down the stairs. Gemini wasn't with him. Mr. Jones stepped away from the stairway. M'Baku froze on the bottom. "T," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you," T'Challa replied, "about a class assignment." Mr. Jones eyed them both curiously. "Come on," M'Baku said. "Let's go outside." T'Challa turned to open the door without looking at Mr. Jones, and he and M'Baku stepped outside. Both boys began to walk, to where T'Challa didn't know. Several moments passed in silence until he finally spoke. "What are you doing, M'Baku? Why did you join them?" "The skulls, I mean. I saw the ritual." M'Baku came to a stop. He turned to T'Challa. "You saw what?" "I saw it all. The blindfolds, the skull, the oath you took. Why would you do it?" M'Baku shook his head. "You spied on me?" "I had to find out what you were doing," T'Challa confessed. "Why you've been acting so strange." "Let me guess," M'Baku challenged him. "Your little nerd friends were with you, right?" T'Challa swallowed back his anger. M'Baku looked at the ground and flexed his jaw. T'Challa saw that he had on new sneakers. "Where'd you get those?" he asked. M'Baku looked up and grinned. Then he bounced on his toes. "Like my new kicks? Pretty dope, huh? Gemini's dad bought 'em for me. Said to consider it a favor." "And what does he want in return?" "Yo, Marcus!" They both turned. Gemini, Bicep, and a few other Skull members were headed in their direction. T'Challa recognized a new face, a girl wearing combat boots. Her hair was drawn back in a ponytail, and her face was sharp and angular, like a fox's. "I'm out," M'Baku said, and turned to meet his friends. "Marcus," T'Challa called, but M'Baku didn't turn around. He only headed toward Gemini with a swagger in his step.